Have you ever noticed something strange about your English? For the first few minutes you feel almost fluent. You answer a question, you make a joke, you explain something clearly. You think, maybe I am finally getting good at this, but then the conversation continues. 5 minutes becomes 10. 10 becomes 20. Someone asks a more complicated question, the topic changes, you get interrupted, you have to explain a story, defend an opinion, remember a detail, or respond quickly, and suddenly your English begins to fall apart, words that you know disappear. Simple grammar becomes difficult, you start translating again, you repeat yourself, you lose the thread of what you were saying. Your answers become shorter, you begin avoiding sentences that you could easily say when you are alone. And then a dangerous thought appears, my English is not good enough. But that thought is often wrong. The problem is not always your English level. The problem is that your brain has not yet learned how to stay in English for a long period of time under real conversational pressure. Think about this carefully. Running for 30 seconds and running for 30 minutes are not the same skill. You may have strong legs and still become exhausted because your body has not developed endurance. Speaking English works in a similar way. You may know thousands of words. You may understand videos, podcasts, and lessons. You may even speak well in short situations, but a long conversation demands something different. It requires mental endurance. Your brain must keep listening, predicting, remembering, choosing words, building sentences, monitoring reactions, and preparing the next thought at the same time. If that system is not trained, your English will feel weaker the longer you speak. This explains why you may sound surprisingly fluent in the first 3 minutes and completely different 20 minutes later. Your knowledge did not disappear, your system became overloaded, and this is exactly what we are going to fix. You do not need to memorize another giant list of vocabulary before you can have long conversations. You do not need perfect grammar. You do not need to become fearless. What you need is to train your brain to remain inside English, even when you become tired, distracted, uncertain, interrupted, or emotionally pressured. Most learners train English in pieces: 10 minutes of vocabulary, a grammar exercise, a short speaking answer, a few sentences in an app. Maybe a 2-minute conversation with a teacher. These activities can be useful, but they create a hidden weakness. They train you to start speaking English. They do not necessarily train you to continue speaking English, and continuing is where real fluency begins. Anyone can memorize a good answer to "tell me about yourself." The real test begins when the other person asks, "Why?" Then they disagree with you. Then they change the topic. Then they ask for an example. Then you need to clarify what you meant. Then you forget a word. Then they interrupt you. Then you have to recover without leaving English mentally. That is not a vocabulary test, it is a stamina test. So if you often feel that your English disappears after a few minutes, do not use that experience as proof that you are bad at English. Use it as information. Your brain is showing you exactly what has not been trained yet. In this lesson, I am going to show you 7 things you can train so that your English does not collapse when a conversation becomes longer. These are not tricks for sounding fluent for 30 seconds. They are habits that make your English more stable, more available, and easier to use when the conversation keeps moving. And as you listen, I want you to notice something. Some of these lessons may sound simple. Do not confuse simple with easy. The habits that create real fluency are often simple, but most learners never practice them long enough for the brain to change. If you train these correctly, a long conversation will stop feeling like a test you are trying to survive. It will begin to feel like a place where your English can breathe. Lesson 1. Stop treating every sentence like a performance. One of the biggest reasons your English becomes weaker during long conversations is that you try to make every sentence too good. At the beginning of a conversation, this may actually help you. You have energy, you are focused, you carefully choose your words, you monitor your grammar. You try to sound clear, you may even hear yourself speaking and think, this is going well. But the problem is that this style of speaking is expensive. It uses too much mental energy. Imagine that every time you want to say something, your brain has to pass through 5 different checkpoints. First, what do I want to say? Second, what vocabulary should I use? Third, is the grammar correct? Fourth, will this sound natural? Fifth, what will the other person think of me? By the time you reach the 5th checkpoint, the conversation has already moved forward. For a short answer, you can survive this process. For a 20-minute conversation, it becomes exhausting. Fluent speakers do not build every sentence like a lawyer preparing a legal document. They speak in a much more flexible way. Sometimes they use simple words. Sometimes they correct themselves. Sometimes they start a sentence and change direction. Sometimes they say, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, or let me put it another way. They are not creating perfect language. They are keeping meaning alive. That difference matters. If your goal is perfect sentences, every mistake feels like failure. If your goal is continuous meaning, mistakes become small problems that you can move through. Long conversations punish perfectionism because perfectionism creates friction. Every extra second you spend checking yourself increases the chance that you will lose the thought, miss part of what the other person says, or become mentally tired. You need to reduce the cost of speaking. Start by giving yourself permission to use easier English than you think you should use.
This is difficult for many intermediate and advanced learners because they believe that simple English makes them sound less intelligent.
In reality, simple English often makes you sound more confident because you are using language you can control.
You suppose you want to explain why you changed jobs?
You could try to say, I came to the realization that the professional environment was no longer aligned with my long-term career aspirations. That sentence is fine if it comes naturally to you, but if you have to build it piece by piece while someone is waiting, it is too expensive. You could simply say, I realized the job was not taking me where I wanted to go, so I decided to leave. Same meaning, lower mental cost, better conversation. This is one of the secrets to staying in English longer. Use language that your brain can access without a search operation. You should have a large area of English that feels automatic, not impressive, automatic. That automatic English becomes your base. When you are tired, surprised, or under pressure, your brain returns to the language that requires the least effort. If your basic speaking patterns are strong, you remain in English. If they are weak, your brain returns to translation. So how do you train this? First, practice saying the same idea in 3 levels of difficulty. For example, take the idea, I was nervous before the meeting. Version 1. I was nervous before the meeting. Version 2. I felt quite nervous before the meeting, because I did not know what they were going to ask me. Version 3. I was more nervous than I expected, because the meeting was important, and I was not sure how the conversation would go. All 3 are correct. The goal is not to always use version 3. The goal is to know that if your brain gets tired, you can drop to version 1 without leaving English. This creates flexibility. Many learners do the opposite. They only practice their best English. Then when their best English becomes unavailable under pressure, they have nothing underneath it. You need a strong lower gear. Think about driving a car uphill. You do not prove that you are a better driver by refusing to change gears. You change gears because the situation demands it. Speaking is the same. When a conversation becomes difficult, reduce complexity before you lose control completely. Instead of stopping for 10 seconds to find the perfect word, use a simpler word. Instead of trying to create a long sentence with 3 clauses, use 2 short sentences. Instead of becoming silent because you forgot a specific noun, describe it. If you forget the word receipt, you can say, the paper they give you after you pay. If you forget appointment, you can say, the time I arranged to meet the doctor. If you forget landlord, you can say, the person who owns the apartment I rent. This is not weak English, this is functional fluency. The ability to keep meaning moving is more important than the ability to produce one perfect sentence. You also need to stop judging the quality of your English while you are speaking. This is a major source of mental fatigue. Part of your brain is having the conversation, while another part is standing outside the conversation giving you a score. That sentence was bad. Your pronunciation sounded strange. You used the wrong tense. You should have used a better word. They probably noticed your mistake. This internal commentary is stealing the mental energy you need for the next sentence. You cannot fully participate in a conversation while constantly reviewing your performance. Correction has a place, but not every second. When you are practicing accuracy, focus on accuracy. When you are practicing conversation, focus on continuation. This distinction can completely change your speaking practice. Most learners mix everything together. They try to speak naturally, remember vocabulary, use perfect grammar, improve pronunciation, avoid pauses, and sound advanced all at the same time. Then they wonder why their brain becomes tired. Separate the jobs. During a fluency session, your main goal should be simple: keep the English moving. If you make a mistake but the meaning is clear, continue. If you forget a word, go around it. If your sentence becomes messy, restart with simpler language. If you need time, use a natural phrase instead of mentally leaving English. You can say, "Let me think for a second." You can say, "That's a good question." You can say, "I've never really thought about that before." You can say, "How can I explain this?" These phrases are useful because they keep your brain inside English while you prepare the next idea. Notice what happens when you do not have these phrases. Someone asks you a difficult question. You become silent. During the silence, your brain returns to your first language. You build an idea there, then you translate it back. Now the conversation feels heavy. A simple English holding phrase can prevent that switch. You are not trying to avoid thinking. You are trying to think inside the language you are using. Another powerful exercise is what I call the good enough sentence exercise. Choose a topic and speak for 10 minutes. Every time you feel the urge to stop and improve a sentence, say the simpler version instead. Your rule is that the sentence only needs to be clear enough to continue. This may feel uncomfortable because your brain is used to chasing correctness, but after a few sessions, you will notice something important. You speak more, you recover faster, you stop fearing imperfect sentences, and because you produce more language, your natural fluency begins to grow. Here is the paradox. When you stop trying to sound fluent every second, you often become more fluent overall. Why? Because fluency is not the absence of mistakes. Fluency is the ability to keep functioning when mistakes happen. This is especially important in long conversations. At minute 2, you may have enough mental energy for beautiful sentences. At minute 20, you need a system that still works when you are tired. Your English needs to be durable, not just impressive. So the next time you feel your English becoming weaker during a conversation, do not immediately push harder. Reduce the complexity, shorten your sentences, use familiar vocabulary, stop checking every detail, return to the English you can control. You are not going backward. You are protecting the conversation, and the more often you practice this, the more your brain learns a new rule. I do not need perfect English to stay in English. That rule is the beginning of conversational endurance. Lesson 2. Build an English buffer before your brain gets tired. Most learners wait until they are already stuck before they try to save the conversation. That is too late. If you want to stay in English for longer, you need to build a buffer before your brain becomes overloaded. A buffer is a small amount of language that is already available while you are still processing what is happening. It gives you space between hearing something and producing your next full answer. Native speakers use buffers constantly, although they usually do not think about them. They say things like, "Yeah, I see what you mean. That depends. There are a couple of ways to look at it. I'm not completely sure, but the first thing that comes to mind is," or "I think the main issue is this." These phrases are not empty. They do an important job. They create time without breaking the rhythm of the conversation. English learners often believe that every second of speaking must contain important information. So when they do not know exactly what to say, they either become silent or switch mentally into their first language. That is where fluency starts to collapse. Imagine someone asks you, "Do you think working from home is better than working in an office?" If you try to create your complete answer immediately, your brain may freeze. You are thinking about the idea, the vocabulary, the grammar, and the structure all at once. But you could begin with, "I think it really depends on the person." That sentence buys you time. Then you can add, "For me, working from home is more comfortable, but I also think it can become isolating." Now the answer is moving. Then perhaps, in an office you have more social contact, but you also lose time commuting. You did not need the entire answer before you started speaking. You built it while you were already inside English. That is a critical fluency skill. Many learners are waiting for complete thoughts. Fluent speakers often speak with incomplete plans. They know the direction before they know every sentence. You need to become comfortable with that. The brain becomes tired when it has to solve too many things before speech begins. A buffer reduces the number of problems you must solve at the same time. There are several types of buffers you should train. The first is the thinking buffer. This is language you use when you genuinely need a moment to think. "Let me think about that. That's interesting. I've never thought about it that way. I'm trying to decide how I feel about that. There are a few things I could say about that. I'm not sure I have a simple answer. Notice how different this feels from silence. Silence can push your brain out of English. A thinking buffer keeps your internal system active in English. The second type is the organizing buffer. This helps when you know what you want to say, but the idea has several parts. The main reason is, there are two things I would mention. First of all, the bigger issue for me is, what matters most is, if I had to explain it simply, these phrases reduce chaos. They tell your brain what kind of sentence should come next. This matters because long conversations are not difficult only because of vocabulary. They are difficult because your mind must organize ideas quickly. If you do not have organizing language, you may know the answer but still feel lost while expressing it. The third type is the reaction buffer. When someone says something unexpected, you do not always need an immediate intelligent response. You can react first. Really, I didn't know that. That makes sense. I can understand why you would think that. That's actually surprising. I had the opposite experience. I'm not sure I agree with that. These phrases keep the interaction alive, while your brain prepares the next layer. This is especially useful when people speak quickly. If you wait until you have a perfect response, the conversation may move on before you speak. A short reaction lets you enter the conversation immediately. The fourth type is the repair buffer. This is one of the most important for long conversations, because mistakes are unavoidable. What I mean is, let me say that differently. That came out wrong. I don't mean exactly that. The word I'm looking for is, I'm not explaining this very well, but these phrases turn mistakes into movement. Without repair language, a mistake can feel like a wall. With repair language, it becomes a small turn in the road. You should practice these phrases until they require almost no effort. And this is where many learners make another mistake. They collect useful expressions but never automate them. Knowing a phrase is not the same as having access to it during pressure. You may recognize, let me put it another way, immediately when you see it in a lesson. But if you never say it out loud repeatedly, your brain may not retrieve it during a real conversation. Fluency depends on availability, not recognition. So choose a small set of buffers and make them part of your speaking reflex. Do not memorize 50 at once, pick perhaps 10. Use them in self-talk. Use them in speaking practice. Use them when answering questions aloud. Use them when you tell stories. Use them even when you do not need them desperately. The goal is to make them automatic before the difficult moment arrives. Think of a boxer. A boxer does not learn how to protect the face for the first time, while someone is throwing a punch. The movement has already been practiced thousands of times. Under pressure, the body returns to what is automatic. Your speaking brain does the same thing. When the conversation becomes difficult, it returns to whatever language has been deeply practiced. This is why long conversations expose the difference between vocabulary you know and vocabulary you own. A word you know may disappear when you are tired. A phrase you own remains available. You can create another useful buffer by learning how to extend an answer in layers. Instead of trying to create a long answer from the beginning, build it in 4 steps. Step 1. Give your position. I prefer living in a smaller city. Step 2. Give a reason. It feels less stressful to me. Step 3. Give an example. For example, I can usually get around without spending hours in traffic. Step 4. Add a contrast or qualification. Of course, bigger cities have more opportunities, so I understand why many people prefer them. This structure is powerful because you never need to see the entire answer before you begin. Your brain only needs the next layer. That single change can make long speaking much easier. You can use the same pattern for almost any topic. Someone asks, should children use smartphones? Position, I think they should have limited access. Reason, they can be useful, but too much screen time can become a problem. Example, for example, some children spend hours watching short videos instead of sleeping or playing outside. Qualification, at the same time, phones can help parents stay in contact with their children. You are now speaking for much longer without needing unusually advanced English. The fluency came from structure. This is important because learners often think long answers require more vocabulary. Sometimes they do, but very often, long answers require better navigation. If you know how to move from opinion to reason, reason to example, example to contrast, and contrast to conclusion, You can speak for minutes using ordinary words, and because the structure is familiar, your brain spends less energy deciding what to do next. That saved energy matters later in the conversation. Think about your mental energy as a battery. If you use 30% of the battery checking grammar in the first 5 minutes, another 30% searching for advanced vocabulary, and another 20% worrying about your accent, there is almost nothing left when the conversation becomes unpredictable. Buffers reduce that waste. They give you familiar pathways. There is another type of buffer that is not spoken aloud. It is your expectation of what might come next. When you listen to someone, do not wait passively for the sentence to finish. Begin predicting the possible direction. If someone says, "I used to love working there, but," your brain should already prepare for a negative contrast. If someone says, "The main reason I moved was," your brain should expect an explanation. If someone says, "Have you ever had a situation where," your brain can begin searching your memory for an example before the question is complete. This kind of prediction reduces reaction time. You are not guessing every word. You are preparing categories of meaning. Long conversations become exhausting when everything feels like a surprise. Prediction makes conversation more predictable. You can train this while listening to interviews or podcasts. Pause before a speaker finishes a thought and ask yourself, where is this going? What kind of idea is likely to come next? What would I say if I were the other person? This is not just a listening exercise. It trains conversational readiness. You can also practice answering before you feel fully ready. That sounds dangerous, but it is one of the best ways to develop fluency. Give yourself 2 seconds after hearing a question, then begin with a buffer phrase. You do not need the whole answer, you only need the opening. For example, question: what is something you have changed your mind about in the last few years? You may have no immediate answer. Instead of freezing, begin: that's a difficult one. I think one thing I've changed my mind about is. While you say that, your brain is searching. Maybe the answer appears, how important rest is. Then continue. I used to think being busy all the time meant I was productive, but now I think it can actually make your work worse. Look at what happened. Your mouth gave your brain time. That is the opposite of what many learners do. They make the brain solve everything first, and only then allow the mouth to speak. In real conversation, that is too slow. You need cooperation between thought and speech. The mouth can carry simple language, while the brain prepares more complex language. This is how you stay in English for longer. A long conversation is not one giant act of fluency. It is thousands of tiny transitions: hearing to understanding, understanding to reaction, reaction to thought, thought to sentence, sentence to correction, correction to continuation. If those transitions are difficult, the conversation drains you. If you build buffers between them, the whole experience becomes lighter. So do not wait until your brain is empty before you search for support. Build the support into your English now. Train your thinking phrases, train your organizing phrases, train your reaction phrases. Train your repair phrases, practice layered answers, practice prediction, practice beginning before the entire sentence is ready. Then when a conversation becomes long, you will not be depending on inspiration. You will have a system. And a system is what keeps your English available after the excitement of the first few minutes is gone. Lesson 3. Train retrieval, not just recognition. One of the most frustrating experiences in English is knowing that you know a word, but being unable to use it when you need it. Someone is waiting for your answer. The word feels close. You can almost see it. You know you have heard it many times. You may even remember the first letter, but it will not come out. Then the conversation ends. You walk away, and 5 minutes later the word suddenly appears. This is not proof that your vocabulary is too small. It is often proof that your vocabulary has been trained for recognition more than retrieval. Recognition means you can understand something when it is shown to you. Retrieval means you can produce it without help. These are not the same ability. You may recognize thousands of words while reading or listening, and still struggle to retrieve a much smaller number while speaking. That gap becomes more obvious in long conversations, because retrieval becomes harder as your brain gets tired. You may find words quickly. Later, after 20 minutes of listening and speaking, the same search becomes slower. If you depend on words that are only weakly connected to active speech, they begin disappearing. This is why your vocabulary can feel as if it is shrinking during a conversation. The words did not leave your brain, access became more difficult, so you need to train access. A common vocabulary routine looks like this: read a word, read its definition, maybe translate it, look at an example, and move to the next word. That can help recognition. But speaking requires something more demanding. You need to begin with an idea and retrieve the English yourself. Suppose the word is hesitate. Recognition practice is seeing the sentence, she hesitated before answering, and understanding it. Retrieval practice is asking yourself what English verb means to pause because you are uncertain, and forcing your brain to find hesitate. Better still, create your own sentence immediately. I hesitate when I have to answer a difficult question in English. Then create another. Don't hesitate to ask me if you need help. Then tell a tiny story using it. Yesterday I wanted to speak to someone at work, but I hesitated because I was not sure how to start the conversation. Now the word is connected to action. That matters. In a long conversation, your brain does not receive a vocabulary list and ask you to recognize the correct answer. It receives meaning, emotion, context, and time pressure. Then it asks, what can I say right now? Your practice should resemble that demand. One of the best ways to train retrieval is topic recycling. Choose one ordinary topic, such as work, family, travel, food, money, learning, technology, health, or childhood. Speak about it for 5 minutes. Record yourself if possible. Later the same day, speak about the same topic again without listening to the first recording. The next day, speak about it again, but from a different angle. If the topic is travel, the first time you might describe a trip you enjoyed. The second time you might explain what makes travel stressful. The third time you might compare traveling alone with traveling with other people. Why repeat the topic? Because repetition turns passive vocabulary into accessible vocabulary. The first time your brain struggles to find language. The second time some pathways are easier. The third time phrases begin appearing before you deliberately search for them. This is how fluency grows. Many learners constantly change topics because they believe repetition is boring. But always changing the topic keeps your vocabulary shallow. You keep entering new territory before your brain has built strong roads in the old territory. You need depth as well as variety. Think about a musician practicing a difficult section of a song. The musician does not play it once and then say, I already did that. The repetition is the training. Speaking is no different. Another powerful retrieval exercise is delayed recall. After you learn a useful phrase, do not immediately look at it 10 times. Hide it. Wait a few minutes. Then try to produce it from memory. Wait an hour. Try again. Try again the next day. Each successful retrieval strengthens the pathway. The slight struggle is useful. Learners often think struggle means learning is going badly. In memory training, the right amount of struggle often means learning is happening. If the answer is always visible, your brain does not need to retrieve it. If you always use subtitles, your listening brain can become dependent on written support. If you always read a sentence before speaking it, your speaking brain can become dependent on prompts. Remove the support sometimes. Make your brain reach. You should also train vocabulary in clusters that reflect real conversation. Do not only learn isolated words. Learn groups that help you perform a conversational function. For giving an opinion, I think, from my point of view, the way I see it, I'm not completely convinced that. For me, the bigger issue is, for disagreement, I see what you mean, but I'm not sure I agree. I think I look at it differently. That may be true in some cases, but for giving examples, for example, a good example would be, one situation that comes to mind is, I had something similar happen when, for uncertainty, I'm not entirely sure, I could be wrong, but my guess would be, I haven't thought about it enough to say for certain. These clusters are useful because long conversations are built from functions, not vocabulary categories. You do not think, now I need an adjective from chapter 12. You think, I need to disagree politely. I need to explain a cause. I need to correct myself. I need to compare two ideas. I need to tell a story. Train language around those jobs. Then when the job appears, the language appears with it. Another reason retrieval becomes slow is that many learners know too many possible ways to say the same thing, but have not made any of them automatic. They know, however, nevertheless, on the other hand, having said that, that being said, although, even so, and in contrast. Then in conversation, the brain wastes time choosing. You do not need maximum variety under pressure. You need reliable defaults. Choose a few phrases that you can access immediately. Maybe your default contrast phrase is, but at the same time. Your default example phrases, for example. Your default repair phrase is, what I mean is. Your default uncertainty phrase is, I'm not completely sure, but. There is nothing wrong with having defaults. Native speakers have them too. People repeat the same structures constantly in natural speech. Fluency is not a competition to avoid repeating useful language. In fact, stable language gives your brain room to create new ideas. If every connecting phrase is automatic, you can spend your mental energy on the content of the conversation. Now let us talk about word searching. When you cannot retrieve a word, you need a rule for how long you will search before moving on. Without a rule, learners can destroy an entire sentence searching for one missing word. They stop, they look away, they translate, they become frustrated, they lose the original thought. The other person becomes uncertain whether they should help. The rhythm disappears. Set a short limit. If the word does not appear within a couple of seconds, describe it, replace it or skip it. Suppose you forget stubborn. You can say, he never changes his mind, even when everyone explains why he might be wrong. That explanation may actually communicate more than the single word. Suppose you forget crowded. Say, there were too many people there. Forget convenient. Say, it makes things easier for me. Forget unreliable. Say, I can't really depend on it. You must learn that a missing word is not an emergency. The fear of forgetting words often causes more damage than the forgetting itself. If your brain believes every missing word is dangerous, it becomes more anxious when retrieval slows. Anxiety makes retrieval even harder. Then you panic because the words are disappearing, which makes more words disappear. Break that cycle. Teach your brain, if a word is missing, I have another route. This creates conversational security. You can train this deliberately with a paraphrasing game. Choose an object, action or idea, and explain it without using its normal name. Explain umbrella without saying umbrella. It's something you carry when it rains. You open it above your head so you don't get wet. Explain jealous. It's the feeling you get when someone has something you want, especially attention, success, or a relationship. Explain deadline. It's the final time or date when something must be finished. This exercise does more than teach vocabulary. It trains your brain not to collapse when one route is blocked. That flexibility is essential in long conversations. You should also train retrieval while slightly tired. Not exhausted, not when your concentration is completely gone, but do some speaking after you have already used English for 15 or 20 minutes. This is important because if you only practice speaking when your brain is fresh, you never train the exact condition that causes your fluency to fail. Listen to an English podcast for 15 minutes, then summarize it aloud without notes. Read an article for 10 minutes, close it. Explain the main ideas in your own words, have a 10-minute self-conversation, then immediately answer 5 difficult questions. The goal is not to make practice painful, the goal is to extend the point at which your English remains usable. Athletes do not build endurance by stopping every time they feel the first sign of fatigue. They work safely beyond the comfortable point so the system adapts. Your speaking brain needs the same progressive challenge. If 5 minutes of English feels comfortable, practice 7. If 10 feels comfortable, practice 15. If 20 feels comfortable, practice 30. Do not jump from 5 minutes to 2 hours and call it discipline. That usually produces frustration, not adaptation. Build gradually, and while you do this, measure the right thing. Do not ask, how many mistakes did I make? Ask, how long could I keep communicating before I mentally left English? Ask, how quickly did I recover when I forgot a word? Ask, did I keep the idea moving? Ask, which phrases were available automatically? Those questions reveal real progress. Your goal is not to make every word instantly available forever. Even native speakers forget words. Even highly educated speakers sometimes say, "What's the word?" Your goal is to build enough retrieval strength and enough flexibility that one missing word does not pull your entire mind out of English. When vocabulary becomes active, conversation becomes lighter. When retrieval becomes faster, you have more energy left for listening. When you can paraphrase, you stop fearing gaps. When you stop fearing gaps, your brain stays calmer, and when your brain stays calmer, more of your English remains available. So the next time you think, I know so much English but I cannot use it, do not immediately learn more. Train access to what you already know, turn recognition into retrieval, turn vocabulary into reflex, turn missing words into detours instead of dead ends. That is how your English survives the later minutes of a real conversation. Lesson 4. Learn to listen without preparing your answer too early. A long conversation becomes exhausting when you are doing two conversations at the same time. There is the real conversation happening in front of you, and there is the private conversation happening inside your head. The other person is still speaking, but you are already preparing your answer. You are choosing vocabulary. You are checking grammar. You are deciding whether your opinion sounds intelligent. You are trying to remember an example. You may even be translating a sentence while the other person is still talking. Then something predictable happens. You miss part of what they said. Now your prepared answer does not completely fit. You become confused. You try to recover. They continue talking. You become more mentally tired, and after several minutes of this, your English starts to feel slow. This is not only a speaking problem, it is an attention problem. If you want to stay in English during long conversations, you need to learn how to listen without constantly abandoning the present moment to prepare the future. This may sound strange because you do need to think ahead sometimes. But there is a difference between light preparation and full sentence construction. Good conversational listening is active, but it is not overloaded. You are following meaning. You are noticing the speaker's direction. You are predicting possibilities. But you are not trying to write your entire response while they are still speaking. Think about what happens in your first language. When someone is telling you a story, you are not normally constructing grammatically perfect responses in advance. You listen, you react. When the person finishes a meaningful unit, your response begins to form naturally. In English, many learners do not trust that process. They believe they need extra preparation because the language is slower, so they begin preparing too early. That creates a trap. The more you prepare while listening, the less you actually hear. The less you hear, the harder it becomes to respond naturally. The harder the response feels, the more you prepare next time. You need to interrupt this cycle. Start by changing your listening goal. Do not try to catch every word. Try to catch the message. This is one of the most important changes an English learner can make. If you believe understanding means hearing every word, fast conversation will always feel dangerous. One unfamiliar word can pull your attention backward while the speaker continues forward. You hear a word you do not know. Your brain says, "What was that?" You mentally repeat the sound. You try to guess the spelling. You search for a translation. Meanwhile, 3 more sentences have passed. Now you are lost. Instead, train yourself to let some words go. Ask, what is the person trying to tell me? What is their main point? Are they agreeing, disagreeing, explaining, complaining, joking, comparing, or asking for something? What changed in the story? What emotion is important here? These questions keep you connected to meaning. Suppose someone says, "The whole process was incredibly tedious, and by the end of it I was just relieved to get out of there." Maybe you do not know tedious, but you hear by the end, relieved, and get out of there. The emotional direction is clear. The experience was unpleasant or exhausting. You can continue the conversation without stopping to solve one word. You might say, "Yeah, it sounds like the whole thing was exhausting." That is successful communication. Later, if the word matters, you can learn it. During the conversation, protect the flow. Another skill is listening in chunks rather than individual words. Real English is full of groups like, "The thing is," "At the end of the day," "As far as I know," "What I mean is," "It turned out that," "The reason I'm saying this is," and "I don't know if you've noticed." When you hear language as chunks, your brain processes fewer units. Imagine reading this sentence one letter at a time. It would be painfully slow. You can read quickly because you recognize whole words and phrases automatically. Listening develops in a similar direction. The more common chunks you recognize as complete units, the less energy you spend decoding them. That saved energy helps you stay in English longer. You can train chunk listening by choosing short pieces of natural English and repeating them aloud exactly as you hear them. Do not only focus on pronunciation. Notice how words connect. Notice which groups feel like one idea. For example, "I don't really know what to make of it." That's not necessarily a bad thing. I was about to say the same thing. The way I look at it. At first I thought, these should eventually feel like single conversational tools, not 5 or 6 separate words. You should also practice what I call delayed response listening. Listen to a speaker for 30 seconds or 1 minute, without planning what you will say. Your only job is to understand. When the speaker stops, wait 1 second, then respond or summarize. At first, you may feel that your answer is slower. That is fine. You are training your brain to trust comprehension before production. Over time, something changes. Your responses become more relevant because they are based on what was actually said, not on the first sentence you heard before your attention disappeared into preparation. This is especially important during disagreements. When someone says something you disagree with, your brain may begin arguing before the person finishes. In your first language, this can already create bad conversations. In English, it creates an additional language problem because your working memory becomes crowded with your argument. Try a different habit. Before disagreeing, summarize their point in 1 simple sentence. So you're saying that, if I understand you correctly, basically you think, this forces you to listen fully. It also gives your brain an English bridge into your response. For example, so you're saying that working from home makes people less productive. I can see why that might happen, but I think it depends on the job. Notice how smooth that is. You did not mentally leave English to build a perfect argument. You used their idea as the starting point for your own. This is another secret of long conversation. Do not create every response from zero. Use the language and ideas already in the conversation. If someone says, I think social media makes people compare themselves too much, you can begin, yeah, that comparison is probably one of the biggest problems. You borrowed the word comparison and built from it. If someone says, the hardest part was dealing with uncertainty, you can say, I think uncertainty is difficult because you don't know what you should prepare for. Again, you are using the conversation as language support. Learners sometimes believe this is repetitive. It is actually natural interaction. Conversation is collaborative. You do not need to invent brand new vocabulary in every sentence. Another way to reduce listening fatigue is to stop translating what you already understand. This sounds obvious, but many learners automatically translate even when the English meaning is already clear. Someone says, I'll probably leave early because I'm tired. You understand the sentence immediately, but your brain still converts it into your first language as a kind of confirmation. That extra step consumes time and attention. You need to teach your brain that understanding is enough. When you hear a simple sentence and understand it, move on. Do not check the translation. This is a habit, and habits take time to change. One useful exercise is image-based listening. When you hear concrete English, try to see the situation instead of seeing words from your first language. If you hear, he dropped his keys and had to go back downstairs, imagine the scene. If you hear, she opened the fridge and realized there was nothing to eat, see it happen. Meaning can exist without translation. For abstract ideas, connect English to concepts, not equivalent sentences in your first language. If you hear confidence, think of the feeling and behavior of confidence. If you hear responsibility, think of what responsibility means in life. You do not need a translation every time. The more direct your connection between English and meaning becomes, the longer your brain can operate in English before becoming tired. You should also accept that understanding in long conversations will sometimes be incomplete. This is not failure. Even native speakers miss details. They ask, sorry, what did you say? They ask, what do you mean? They misunderstand names, numbers, references, and jokes. English learners often treat clarification as proof that their English is weak, so they pretend to understand. That creates more problems later. If you miss something important, ask immediately. Sorry, did you say Tuesday or Thursday? What do you mean by that? I missed the last part, could you say it again? When you say they, who do you mean? These are not emergency phrases, they are normal conversational tools. Clarification protects your working memory because you stop carrying uncertainty through the next 5 minutes. Imagine you misunderstand one important detail in a story but never ask. Every new sentence now conflicts with your mental picture. You spend energy trying to repair the story silently. That is exhausting. One 10-second clarification can save 5 minutes of confusion. There is one more habit that destroys long conversation listening, mentally reviewing your last mistake, while the other person is speaking. You say something, you immediately realize you used the wrong tense. The other person begins answering, but you are thinking, I should have said went, not go. Now you miss their response because you are correcting a sentence that is already finished. Let it go. If the mistake changed the meaning, correct it quickly. If the meaning was clear, continue listening. Your previous sentence is no longer the most important thing in the conversation. The current sentence is. This ability to release mistakes is part of fluency. You cannot remain in English for 30 or 60 minutes if you carry every error with you. You need to travel light, so when you practice listening, do not only ask whether you understood the audio. Train the habits that make understanding sustainable. Listen for meaning, not perfection. Recognize chunks. Let unknown words pass when they are not essential. Stop translating sentences you already understand. Use the speaker's language as support for your response. Ask for clarification instead of pretending. Do not build your entire answer while the other person is still talking. And do not replay old mistakes while new English is arriving. When you listen this way, you free enormous amounts of mental energy. And that energy is exactly what you need later in the conversation, when the easy questions are finished and real communication begins. Lesson 5. Stop letting one difficult moment pull you out of English. Most long conversations do not collapse slowly. They often collapse because of one moment. You are speaking well, then you forget a word, someone interrupts you, you misunderstand a question, you make a grammar mistake. The other person asks you to repeat yourself. You hear a phrase you do not understand, you tell a joke and the reaction is not what you expected. That single moment creates a mental shock. Your attention suddenly turns inward. What happened? Did I sound stupid? Was that sentence wrong? Why can't I remember this word? Do they think my English is bad? Now you are no longer simply having a conversation. You are managing an internal emergency. This is one of the biggest reasons learners lose English after several minutes. It is not always fatigue alone. It is accumulated emotional friction. Every small mistake takes a little confidence. Every misunderstanding creates tension. Every hesitation feels like evidence. Eventually the brain reaches a point where it says, I need safety. And for many learners, safety means returning mentally to the first language. You need to train recovery. Recovery is the ability to experience a difficult conversational moment without allowing it to control the next 5 minutes. This is a separate skill from vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. A learner with imperfect English but strong recovery can often communicate better than a learner with advanced English who mentally collapses after one mistake. Imagine two people. The first person says, yesterday I went to the bank and, then continues the story. The second person says, yesterday notices the mistake, becomes embarrassed, stops, restarts the entire sentence, begins thinking about tense rules, loses the story, apologizes, and then gives a much shorter answer than they originally wanted to give. Who appears more fluent? Usually the first person, not because the first person made fewer mistakes, because the mistake had less power. This is what you need to understand. Conversational fluency is partly determined by how expensive your mistakes are. If every mistake costs you 20 seconds of mental recovery, long conversations will destroy you. If a mistake costs you 1 second, you can keep going for a long time. So how do you reduce that cost? First, stop treating correction as a restart. When possible, correct only the broken piece and continue. I've been there last year. Sorry, I went there last year, and I really liked it. He doesn't really enjoy traveling. There were a lot of people, so we left early. You do not need to return to the beginning of the sentence every time. The conversation does not need a perfect replacement version. Repair the important part and move forward. Second, learn to separate communication errors from language errors. A language error is when your English is not completely correct. A communication error is when the other person cannot understand what you mean. These are not the same. If you say, I went there yesterday and buy some clothes, the tense is wrong, but the meaning is probably clear. You do not need to stop the conversation and perform an emergency grammar lesson on yourself. If you accidentally say 15 when you mean 50, that may change the meaning significantly. Correct it. Your priorities should be based on communication, not perfection. Third, build a recovery sentence for the moments when your brain goes blank. You need something automatic that prevents silence from turning into panic. For example, I lost my train of thought for a second. I know what I want to say, but I can't find the word. Give me a second, I'm trying to explain this clearly. I forgot where I was going with that. Let me start that part again. These phrases are powerful because they normalize the moment. Instead of hiding the problem, you simply manage it in English. That is a huge shift. Many learners believe fluent people never get stuck. Fluent people get stuck all the time. They simply remain communicative while stuck. They know how to stay inside the interaction. You can even use humor if it fits your personality. My brain just deleted that word. I had the word 2 seconds ago. That sentence sounded much better in my head. The exact phrase is not important. The important thing is that the difficult moment becomes part of the English conversation, instead of an exit from it. Another recovery skill is learning how to survive interruption. Interruptions are extremely difficult for many English learners because they destroy the sentence that was being prepared. You may have been carefully holding several words in working memory. Someone interrupts with a question or comment. You respond. Then when you try to return, the original sentence is gone. This can make you feel much less fluent than you actually are. You need interruption markers. Anyway, what I was saying was, going back to what I mentioned earlier. Before I forget, the other thing I wanted to say was, where was I? Right, so. As I was saying, these phrases help you reopen the previous thread. Practice them deliberately. Tell a story aloud. Halfway through, stop yourself and answer a random question, then return to the story using one of these phrases. It may feel artificial in practice, but the skill becomes very real when someone interrupts you during an actual conversation. You should also practice recovering from misunderstanding. Suppose someone explains something and you respond, then you realize you misunderstood the point. Many learners become embarrassed and try to hide it. Do not say, "Oh, I misunderstood you, I thought you meant," or, "Ah, now I understand, I was thinking of something different." Then continue. This is normal conversation. A misunderstanding is only dangerous when you turn it into a judgment about your English. Remember, communication between native speakers is full of repair. People hear the wrong thing, they assume the wrong meaning, they interrupt, they forget names, they ask for repetition, they change their minds in the middle of sentences. Real conversation is messy. If your idea of fluency is based on edited videos, scripted speeches, or textbook dialogues, you may have an unrealistic standard. Textbook conversations are clean because they were designed to teach language. Real conversations are alive, and living language is full of unfinished sentences, corrections, repetition, vague words, interruptions, and sudden changes. You need to become fluent in the mess, not only fluent in perfect conditions. Another problem appears when learners interpret the other person's facial expression too much. You say something and they look confused for half a second. Immediately your brain says, "My English was wrong." Maybe it was, but maybe they were thinking, maybe they did not hear you. Maybe they disagree, maybe they are tired, maybe they are distracted, maybe the idea itself was surprising. Do not turn every reaction into a language diagnosis. If they clearly do not understand, clarify. Otherwise, keep going. You cannot sustain a long conversation if half of your attention is constantly scanning the other person for evidence that you are failing. That is another form of mental exhaustion. Your job is communication, not mind reading. Now consider what happens after a difficult moment. Most learners make the mistake of trying to compensate. They make one simple grammar error, then suddenly try to sound more advanced to prove that their English is good. They use longer sentences. They reach for difficult vocabulary. They become more self-conscious. This increases mental load exactly when they should reduce it. Do the opposite. After a difficult moment, simplify for the next 30 seconds. Return to easy English. Use familiar structures. Get the rhythm back. If you trip while walking, you do not immediately start running faster to prove that you can walk. You regain your balance first. Conversation works the same way. This recovery period is important. Suppose you completely lose your sentence. You say, "Sorry, I lost my train of thought." Then begin again with a simple statement. "The main thing I wanted to say is that I don't think the plan will work." Good, you are moving again. Now give one reason. "We don't have enough time." Then an example. "Last time a smaller project took us almost 2 months." Within seconds you are back in control. You did not need to recover your exact original sentence. You recovered the meaning. That distinction is essential. Sometimes learners become obsessed with reconstructing the lost sentence word for word. Do not do that. If it is gone, let it go. Continue from the idea. Your brain is not a recording device. Conversation does not require exact reconstruction. You can also build recovery through pressure practice. Most learners practice in conditions that are too comfortable. They choose a topic, prepare vocabulary, know the questions in advance, and speak without interruption. Then real conversation feels completely different. Add small amounts of unpredictability to practice. Answer random questions. Change topics unexpectedly. Give yourself only 2 seconds to begin. Tell a story while a timer occasionally signals you to pause and restart. Ask a speaking partner to interrupt with natural follow-up questions. Practice explaining the same idea after someone says, "I don't understand." Practice giving a second example when someone says, "Can you explain that?" You are training the recovery muscles before you need them. There is another deep reason this works. Your brain learns from experience, not only from advice. You can tell yourself 1,000 times, mistakes are okay. But if every speaking practice ends the moment you feel embarrassed, your brain learns a stronger lesson. Mistakes mean danger and escape. You need repeated experiences of making a mistake and continuing successfully. That teaches your nervous system something new. I made a mistake, and the conversation continued. I forgot a word, and I found another way. I misunderstood, and I clarified. I got interrupted, and I returned to my point. I went blank, and I recovered. Nothing terrible happened. That is how confidence is actually built. Confidence is not telling yourself that you will never fail. Confidence is knowing what you will do when something goes wrong. This is why recovery is more powerful than trying to eliminate every problem. You cannot control every conversation. You cannot control how quickly someone speaks. You cannot control every unfamiliar accent. You cannot guarantee that every word will appear when you need it. You cannot prevent every misunderstanding, but you can train what happens next. And what happens next determines whether one difficult moment remains one difficult moment, or becomes the reason your English disappears for the rest of the conversation. Your goal is not to become unshakable because nothing ever goes wrong. Your goal is to become recoverable. That is a much more realistic form of fluency. When you know how to repair, clarify, restart, simplify, paraphrase, and return after interruption, you stop fearing the unpredictable parts of conversation. And when you stop fearing them, your brain wastes less energy protecting you from them. That energy becomes available for language. So remember this the next time you make a mistake in the middle of a long conversation. Do not ask, "How do I erase that mistake?" Ask, "How quickly can I return to meaning?" That one question can change the entire way you speak English. Lesson 6. Build speaking stamina the same way you build physical stamina. If your English feels good for 5 minutes and weak after 20, there is a simple conclusion you need to accept. You have trained short speaking better than long speaking. That is not a character flaw. It is a training result. A person who can sprint quickly is not automatically able to run 10 kilometers. A learner who can answer 10 short questions is not automatically ready for a 40-minute conversation. Long speaking needs progressive endurance. Most learners never train this directly. They practice in short bursts and then expect themselves to perform for long periods when the opportunity finally comes. When their brain becomes tired, they assume their English level is the problem. Instead, start measuring duration. Choose one day this week and speak English continuously for 10 minutes. You can talk to yourself, record a voice note, speak with a partner, or respond to a series of questions. The important rule is that you remain in English. If you forget a word, explain it. If you lose your thought, restart. If you need time, use a thinking phrase. Do not stop the session because the language becomes less beautiful. The purpose is not to prove how good you sound. The purpose is to teach your brain to keep operating. Then increase the duration gradually. 10 minutes becomes 12. 12 becomes 15. 15 becomes 20. Later, 20 becomes 30. You do not need to increase every day. Give the brain time to adapt. The quality may temporarily drop as duration increases. That is normal. If your English is excellent for 10 minutes, but becomes simpler between minutes 10 and 15, that does not mean the extra 5 minutes are useless. Those 5 minutes are exactly where endurance is being built. You are entering the zone where your automatic English has to carry more of the load. This is also where you discover your real weaknesses. Maybe you repeat the same connectors constantly. Maybe you run out of ways to explain reasons. Maybe your vocabulary is strong for work, but weak for personal stories. Maybe you can express opinions, but struggle with follow-up questions. Maybe listening becomes the problem before speaking does. Long practice reveals what short practice hides. Use that information intelligently. Do not respond by learning everything. Fix the bottleneck. If you keep running out of ways to continue, practice extension patterns, reason, example, contrast, consequence, personal experience. If you keep getting stuck on forgotten words, practice paraphrasing. If listening drains you, spend more time with natural conversational audio. If interruptions destroy your flow, practice returning to your point. Endurance training should expose weaknesses and then guide your next practice. Another important rule is to vary the type of long speaking you do. A 30-minute monologue is useful, but conversation requires turn-taking, so sometimes practice with questions. Create a list of 20 questions on one broad topic. Answer each without preparing. Allow your answers to connect naturally. You can also use a conversation ladder. Start with an easy question and make each question slightly deeper. For example, what do you usually do on weekends? Then, why do you enjoy that? Then, has that changed as you've gotten older? Then, do you think people today have enough free time? Then, what would you change about modern work culture? Notice how the language demand grows naturally. This is much closer to real conversation than answering 20 unrelated beginner questions. You should also train topic changes. Real conversations do not stay neatly inside one chapter. People move from work to family, from family to travel, from travel to money, from money to technology. Topic changes force your brain to activate a different vocabulary network. Practice saying, "That reminds me of something else, speaking of that," or "on a slightly different topic," then move somewhere new. Your brain becomes better at changing language environments without leaving English, and remember recovery days. If you do an intense English session, you do not need to punish yourself with another one immediately. Quality matters. The goal is sustainable adaptation, not exhaustion. A useful routine could be 3 longer speaking sessions per week, and shorter maintenance practice on other days. What matters is consistency over time. One heroic 2-hour session will not build the same endurance as repeated 30-minute sessions across several weeks. This is where patience becomes practical. You are changing processing speed, retrieval strength, attention habits, and emotional response under pressure. Those systems improve through repeated exposure. Eventually something interesting happens. 10 minutes no longer feels long, then 20 minutes no longer feels dangerous. You notice that after making a mistake, you keep going without thinking about it. You notice that you can listen while tired and still understand the main point. You notice that a missing word no longer creates panic. You notice that you are still thinking in English at the end of a conversation instead of desperately translating. That is stamina, and once you have it, your English begins to feel much more stable because you are no longer depending on perfect conditions. You have trained the later minutes, not just the first ones. Lesson 7. Make English the place where the conversation happens. The final shift is the deepest one. You need to stop treating English as something you visit only when it is your turn to speak. If the other person speaks English, but you listen through translation, prepare your answer in your first language, judge yourself in your first language, and only convert the final sentence into English, then your conversation is not really happening in English. English is only the output layer. That system is too slow for long conversations. You need more of the entire process to happen inside English, not perfectly, not every thought, but enough that English becomes the working environment instead of the final product. Start with your inner reactions. When someone says something surprising, let the first reaction be simple English. "Really? That's strange. I didn't expect that. I agree. I'm not sure about that." When you are deciding what to say, use basic English thoughts. "I need an example. There are 2 reasons. I don't know the exact word. Let me explain the main point first." These tiny internal sentences matter because they keep the next thought connected to English. You can train this outside conversation too. For 10 minutes a day, narrate ordinary life in English without trying to sound impressive. I need to finish this first. I forgot to reply to that message. I'm getting tired. I should leave in about 20 minutes. That was more expensive than I expected. This kind of self-talk may look too simple, but simplicity is the point. You are creating a direct route between experience and English. Then move to more complex thinking. Explain why you made a decision, compare two options, rehearse an opinion, describe what annoyed you, predict what might happen tomorrow. Do not translate a prepared thought. Discover the thought through English. At first your thinking may become simpler, that is normal. Your English mind is learning to stand on its own. Over time, it becomes more flexible, and when you enter a real conversation, you no longer need to build the entire bridge from your first language every time you speak. There is another important habit. Stay in English after the conversation ends. Many learners finish a conversation and immediately switch into self-criticism in their first language. They replay mistakes, translate what they wish they had said, and decide the conversation went badly. Instead, spend 2 minutes reviewing it in English. Ask yourself, what went well? Where did I get stuck? Which word did I need? What could I say next time? This keeps the learning connected to the same language system. Then choose 1 or 2 problems to fix, not 20. Maybe you needed the phrase, what I'm trying to say is. Practice it. Maybe you could not explain a certain idea. Explain it again now, slowly. Maybe you misunderstood a common phrase. Learn that phrase. This turns every real conversation into training for the next one. Most importantly, stop waiting for the day when English feels completely effortless before you allow yourself to have long conversations. Effortlessness is usually the result of long exposure, not the requirement for it. You become comfortable by spending time in the uncomfortable middle, the place where you know enough English to communicate, but still have to recover, simplify, ask questions, and search occasionally. That middle stage is not something to escape. It is where fluency is built. Your objective is not to become a person who never loses a word, never misunderstands, never pauses, and never makes a mistake. Your objective is to become a person who can remain inside English while all of those things happen. That is what makes long conversations possible. So when you notice your English weakening after a few minutes, remember what is really happening. Your language has not vanished. Your brain may be spending too much energy performing. Your vocabulary may be easier to recognize than retrieve. You may be preparing answers while you should be listening. One mistake may be pulling you into self-consciousness, or you may simply be reaching the limit of the endurance you have trained so far. Every one of those problems can be trained. Use simpler English before you become overloaded. Build automatic buffers. Practice retrieval. Listen for meaning. Recover quickly. Extend your speaking time gradually, and make English part of the thinking process, not only the sentence that comes out of your mouth. Then something begins to change. You stop measuring fluency by your best 30 seconds. You start noticing that you can still speak after 15 minutes, then 30, then longer. You stop panicking when a word disappears, because you know how to go around it. You stop treating interruptions like disasters, because you know how to return. You stop translating every thought, because English itself begins to carry the thought. And one day, you finish a long conversation and realize something almost quietly. You stayed in English, not perfectly, but continuously. That is the kind of progress that matters, because real fluency is not proving that you know English when everything is easy. Real fluency is keeping communication alive when your brain is tired, the topic changes, the words are imperfect, and the conversation keeps moving. Train for that version of English. Do not only train to start speaking, train to stay.